The song started playing the moment she opened the drawer. It wasn't just any song. It was that song. The same one that played the last time he was still alive. The same one she had avoided for months, skipping it whenever it appeared in the algorithm, turning her face away when she heard it in a public place. And now, there, without anyone asking, without her touching anything, the song just started, on the kitchen radio. At the exact moment her fingers found his photo at the bottom of the drawer, she stopped. Her heart raced. Her hands trembled as she held that piece of paper she hadn't seen in so long. For a second, maybe two, the feeling was one of relief, as if something greater had responded. As if the universe, after all, was not as indifferent as it seemed. As if in some inexplicable way he was there, saying that everything was fine, that she was not alone. And then came the fear that it meant nothing. The fear of inventing connections where there are none. The fear that the mind, desperate for meaning, was creating imaginary bridges over a real abyss. But how to explain the precision? How to explain the impossible timing? How to call something chance that seems to have been orchestrated with a silent, almost cruel intelligence? This wasn't the first time, and it won't be the last. Maybe it happened with a name. You think of someone you haven't seen in years, and on the same day, for no apparent reason, that person shows up. On the street, in your feed, in an unexpected phone call, as if the simple act of thinking had summoned a presence. Or maybe it was an object, something you lost months ago and suddenly, at the exact moment of greatest need, reappears. Not just anywhere, but exactly where you looked 1,000 times before, as if the universe had saved it for the right moment. Or maybe it was a phrase. You wake up with a question that is impossible to answer, and hours later, someone, without knowing anything, says exactly the phrase that seemed to answer it, word for word, as if they had read your thoughts. And every time this happens, the same doubt returns, stronger, more uncomfortable. Is this real, or am I going crazy? Because there is a name for this: synchronicity, meaningful coincidences, events that have no visible causal connection, but seem to carry a symbolic weight that is impossible to ignore. Jung spent decades studying this. Einstein discussed the concept with him. Both knew there was something there, something that traditional science couldn't explain, or didn't want to. But here's the problem. Accepting that synchronicities are real means accepting that the universe has some kind of intention, some kind of consciousness, some form of invisible communication operating behind the surface of things. And if you accept that, the world changes, completely. But denial also has a cost, because if you decide that everything is just chance, that your mind is inventing patterns where none exist, that the universe is blind and indifferent, that nothing you feel has any correspondence with reality, then you have to learn to live with a very specific kind of loneliness. The loneliness of someone who knows that no event, however improbable it may seem, will ever carry meaning beyond what you project onto it. And maybe that's the real question. Not whether synchronicities are real, but what it reveals about you, about your mind, about your hunger for meaning, about the void you're trying to fill, the fact that you need them to be. Because the truth is that your mind is not neutral. It does not observe the world passively, recording events like a cold, objective camera. Your mind is desperate for connection, for order, for meaning. And when it doesn't find it, it creates it. But it doesn't do this consciously. It acts behind the scenes, silently, modifying memories, selecting coincidences, amplifying insignificant details until they seem like cosmic messages. And you, the part of you that thinks, that decides, that believes it is in control, never notices. So the question becomes deeper. When you experience synchronicity, what is really happening? Is the universe speaking? Or is your mind screaming alone in a silent void? And you are mistaking the echo for an answer. The human mind is a pattern machine, not by choice, by necessity. For millions of years, the ancestors who survived were not the strongest. They were the ones who could identify patterns before it was too late. The rustling in the leaves could be wind, or it could be a predator. The mark on the ground could be a shadow, or it could be the trail of something dangerous. Those who hesitated died. Those who saw patterns lived. And that's why you're still here. Your brain inherited this system. A pattern detector working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, without pause, without rest. It constantly scans the environment, connecting dots, looking for relationships, trying to predict what comes next. Not because it's curious, but because your survival depends on it. There's just one problem. This system cannot distinguish between real patterns and invented ones. It doesn't care if the connection actually exists or if you're just projecting meaning where there is none. For the brain, it's better to err on the side of seeing a lion where there isn't one than to ignore a real lion. The cost of a false positive is low. The cost of a false negative is death. So it errs on the side of caution, always. And synchronicities are the side effect of this system running in a modern reality that no longer has lions in the shadows. When you think of someone and that person calls you on the same day, your brain registers it as a significant event. But it completely ignores all the times you thought of someone and nothing happened. All the times someone called without you having thought of that person. All the thousands of daily interactions that don't form any pattern. This has a name: confirmation bias. You retain what validates your belief. You discard what contradicts it. And the stronger the emotional need to believe, the more selective your memory becomes. Another example: you're driving and you see the same red car 3 times on the same day. It seems impossible. It seems planned. But you don't register the 47 white cars, the 32 black cars, the 18 blue cars that also passed you. Your brain erased everything that didn't seem relevant. It left only what generated amazement. And now you have a story, a synchronicity. Science calls this apophenia, the tendency to perceive connections and meanings in random data, faces in clouds, numbers that haunt you, sequences of events that seem to conspire in favor of a narrative. Jung knew this. He wasn't naive. He understood perfectly well that the brain projects meaning, but he chose to ask another question. What if the projection, even if illusory, reveals something true about a person's inner state? Because here's the detail that scientific explanation alone cannot resolve. Why does it hurt so much when someone says it was just a coincidence? If it were just about probability, about statistics, about neurology, you would accept the explanation and move on. But that's not what happens. There is resistance, an emotional refusal, as if accepting that there is no meaning would be to betray something essential in you. And maybe it is, because synchronicities don't appear in a neutral way. They don't happen evenly throughout life. They are concentrated at specific moments, transitions, crises, losses, impossible decisions, moments when your mental map of the world seems insufficient to explain what is happening to you. That's when the mind fires up its pattern detection system at full intensity, not because the universe is speaking louder, but because you are on high alert, hyper-vigilant, desperately searching for clues, for guidance, for any sign that there is a way out, an answer. And when the mind is in this state, it finds it, always. Not because the signs are really there, but because it is tuned to transform noise into signal, chance into meaning, coincidence into message. You lose someone. In the days that follow, that person's name appears everywhere, on signs, in other people's conversations, in books you open at random. It seems impossible, it seems intentional, but what has changed is not the world, it is your attention. Before that name went unnoticed, now it sets off an alarm. Your brain is actively searching, filtering millions of stimuli per second and highlighting only those that correspond to the open wound. And then you get the impression that the universe is insisting on something, when in fact it is you who cannot stop searching. Schopenhauer said that chance is unbearable to the human will, the idea that events have no cause, no purpose, no underlying intention. This goes against everything the human mind needs to function. So it invents causality, it creates narratives, it constructs meaning even when there is no raw material for it. And modernity has intensified this process, because modernity promised control. It promised that with enough science, enough technology, enough information, you would be able to predict, plan, and master chance. But what happened was the opposite. Life became fragmented, meaning dissolved. The great narratives, religious, communal, existential, lost their power. And what was left was a functional void. You wake up, perform tasks, manage commitments, solve technical problems. But at no point does anyone tell you why. At no point do you feel that you are participating in something greater, something that justifies the exhaustion, something that makes existence seem less arbitrary. So when synchronicity happens, it's not just a curious coincidence, it is a relief. It is the feeling, however brief, that there is something beyond the mechanics, that you are not completely alone in a blind and indifferent universe, that maybe, just maybe, there is a hidden logic operating behind appearances. And that's why you cling to it, not because it's irrational, but because the alternative, accepting that everything is really chance, that there is no meaning embedded in anything, that you are sailing an ocean without a compass and without a destination, is almost unbearable. But here's the hard part to accept. Your brain knows this, and it uses it against you. It knows you need meaning, so it fabricates it. It selects memories. It amplifies coincidences. It connects events that have no causal relationship, and it delivers a ready-made story to you. A narrative that seems true because it feels true, but feeling is not knowing. And perhaps the most honest question is not, is this real synchronicity or just coincidence? Perhaps it is. Why do I need this to be more than chance? Because that answer, as the real answer, is not in the universe. It's in you. There's a clear pattern. People don't report synchronicities during peaceful vacations. They don't talk about impossible coincidences in moments of stability. Synchronicities appear when something is breaking, when someone has died, when a relationship has ended, when a career has collapsed, when the identity you've built over years suddenly seems fragile, temporary, insufficient. It is in these moments that the universe begins to speak, but maybe it's not the universe. Maybe it's the mind in despair trying to build a bridge over the chasm that has just opened up. Because grief is not just about loss, it's about the dissolution of meaning. When someone who structured your life disappears, the whole world becomes unstable. Routines lose their logic, plans lose their direction, and suddenly you are in a place where nothing seems to make sense the way it did before. And that's exactly when synchronicities explode. The music that played when he was alive starts popping up everywhere. The bird he loved to watch appears at the window every morning. A book falls off the shelf and opens to the exact page that seems to answer the question you couldn't formulate. Coincidence? Perhaps. But pain does not accept this explanation. Pain needs something greater, something that justifies its permanence, something that allows us to believe that the person is still present in some way, that the bond has not been completely broken, that there is communication, even if it is encrypted, even if it is symbolic. And the mind delivers exactly that, not because it is true, but because it is what allows us to continue. Schopenhauer understood this in a brutal way. He said that human will, that blind force that drives us to exist, to persist, to seek, cannot bear chance. It needs causality. It needs reason. It needs order. When life becomes radically unpredictable, when suffering seems random and purposeless, the mind collapses. Because if nothing has a cause, if nothing has a reason for being, then suffering is just gratuitous cruelty, and that is unbearable. So the mind creates causality. It invents explanations. It constructs narratives that connect unrelated events and transforms chance into destiny. Synchronicities work exactly like this. They are the mind's way of saying this was not random. This had to happen. And if it had to happen, then there is a greater meaning at work. And if there is a greater meaning, then you are not lost, just temporarily confused. It is comfort built into illusion, but it is not weakness. It is a symptom of an era that has desacralized the human experience, that has turned everything into functionality, that has reduced life to processes, tasks, productivity metrics, that has promised that if you work hard enough, plan well enough, optimize every second, you will have control. And then life does what it always does. It ignores your plans. It shatters your certainties. It pulls the rug out from under your feet, and suddenly you realize that you have no control. You never did. And worse, you don't even have a symbolic map to deal with it, because modernity has stripped away rituals. It has dissolved myths. It has emptied symbols of meaning. In the past, when someone died, there was a process, a ritualized mourning, songs, prayers, shared symbols that helped the mind process the unprocessable, not because they were true in a literal sense, but because they offered emotional structure, symbolic language, collective recognition that something sacred had been broken. Today you have 3 days off, and the expectation to return functional. So what does the mind do? It creates its own rituals, its own symbolic languages, and synchronicities become the last refuge of enchantment, the last space where life can still seem fraught with mystery, where the world can still seem alive, responsive, conscious. It's not the universe speaking, it's you begging it to speak. And here's the painful part. You know it. On some deep levels, you know you're projecting meaning, that you're creating patterns, that you're clinging to coincidences because the alternative is unbearable. But what should you do? Stop looking for meaning? Accept that everything is just cold, purposeless mechanics? Live as if there were no difference between meaningful events and random noise? That sounds like wisdom, maturity, realism. But in practice, it's impossible, because the human mind wasn't made to work that way. It can't inhabit a completely meaningless world without collapsing. It needs narrative, causality, meaning, even if it's invented. And maybe there's nothing wrong with that. Maybe the problem isn't that you seek meaning. Maybe it's that you've been taught to feel ashamed of it, as if seeking meaning were a sign of weakness, as if needing something beyond cold rationality were childish, as if emotional maturity consisted of accepting emptiness without resistance. But resisting emptiness is not weakness. It's what keeps you human. So when someone says, "It was just a coincidence," what they're really saying is, stop searching for meaning. Accept that the world is indifferent. Accept that your pain doesn't matter to anyone but you. Accept loneliness. And you don't want to accept that. Because accepting that is giving up the last thread of connection that still seems possible. But what if Jung was right? Not in the way many interpret it, but in a deeper way. What if synchronicities weren't about the universe speaking, but about you finally listening? Jung wasn't a mystic, at least not in the way many imagine. He was a psychiatrist, a doctor, someone trained to observe patterns of behavior, symptoms, mental processes, and it was precisely this training that led him to a strange conclusion. There are things happening in the human mind that consciousness does not control. Invisible processes, automatic symbolizations, connections that form without permission. And synchronicities for Jung were the external expression of this internal process. He did not believe that the universe was literally sending messages. He didn't think there was a cosmic intelligence organizing events to coincide with his thoughts. What he proposed was more subtle and perhaps more disturbing. Synchronicities occur when the unconscious projects psychic content onto the external world, not in a magical way, but in a perceptive way. Let that sink in for a second. What Jung was saying is that the unconscious mind, that part of you that processes emotions, conflicts, fears, desires without you realizing it, is constantly trying to communicate something. And when consciousness ignores it, when you're so distracted by the surface of life that you can't hear what's going on inside, the unconscious uses another strategy. It begins to highlight external events that symbolize the internal conflict. You end a relationship. Rationally, you know it was the right decision, but there is something unresolved, something you don't want to admit. So the unconscious acts, and suddenly, that person's name appears everywhere. Not because they are stalking you, not because the universe is trying to reunite you, but because your mind is screaming, you haven't processed this yet. And the only way it can be heard is by turning the external world into a mirror of the internal world. Jung called this synchronicity, meaningful coincidence, not because the external event was caused by the internal one, but because it carries for you a symbolic weight that reveals the state of your psyche. It's projection, but it's not an empty illusion, because what is being projected is real. The conflict is real, the need to process is real. What is not real is the idea that the universe is actively participating in this conversation. It is you talking to yourself, through the world, and that changes everything. Because it means that synchronicities are not about discovering hidden messages in the fabric of reality. They're about learning to read your own symbolic language, about recognizing that your mind is constantly trying to show you something, and that it uses what's available around you to do so. Think about dreams. No one believes that dreams are literal messages sent by external entities. Everyone understands that dreams are internal processes, automatic symbolizations that the mind creates to organize experiences, fears, desires. Synchronicities work the same way. The difference is that they happen while you are awake, and they use real events as symbolic raw material. You lose your job, you are confused. You don't know if it was your fault, if it was unfair, if you should have done something differently. Then walking down the street, you see a bird stuck in a fence, struggling to free itself. And something inside you recognizes that as a mirror. The bird is you, but not because the universe put that bird there as a sign. Rather, because your mind, in a state of symbolic alertness, highlighted that specific event among thousands of others that you ignored. It chose that one, because it corresponded to what you were feeling, and it transformed a mundane event into a symbol. This is no less powerful because it is internal. In fact, it is more so, because it means that the ability to create meaning is not outside of you. It is inside, and you have access to it all the time. You just didn't know you were using it. Jung understood this. He validated the experience of synchronicity without resorting to the supernatural. He said, yes, this is real. Yes, it matters, but not in the way you think. And perhaps that's the only honest way to deal with synchronicities without falling into two equally destructive extremes. Naive mysticism that turns everything into a cosmic message, or reductionist materialism that dismisses everything as worthless illusion. Because both miss the point. The point is not whether the universe has consciousness. The point is that you do. And your consciousness is constantly building bridges between the internal and the external, trying to give form to the formless, language to the speechless. This is human, deeply human. And synchronicities are just the most visible version of this process that happens all the time in everything you do. You choose a song and it speaks to you on that specific day, not because the song has changed, but because you have changed. You are in an emotional state where those lyrics, that melody resonate, and suddenly it seems like the song was written for you. That the artist knew what you were feeling. Projection? Yes, but projection that reveals something true about what is happening inside you. Or you open a book at random and the sentence you read seems to answer the question you were asking. Coincidence? Statistically, yes. But symbolically, your mind chose to highlight that sentence. It ignored all the others. because that one resonated, because that one corresponded to something you needed to hear. And maybe the unconscious is wiser than the conscious mind admits. Maybe it knows things you are avoiding. Maybe it sees patterns that the rational mind has not yet connected. Maybe it is trying to guide you, not with mystical messages from the universe, but with the silent intelligence that has always existed within you. Jung believed this. He believed that the unconscious was not just a repository of trauma and repression as Freud proposed. It was also a source of wisdom, a non-rational intelligence that operates through symbols, associations, and intuitions that logic cannot explain. And synchronicities are one of the ways this intelligence communicates. You don't have to believe in anything supernatural to validate this. You just have to accept that there are parts of you that you don't control. Processes happening in parallel to your consciousness. And that, from time to time, these processes find a way to manifest themselves, not as an order from the universe, but as an internal order seeking external expression. And perhaps this is more powerful than any mystical explanation, because it means that you are not at the mercy of external forces. You are not waiting for signs from something greater. You are the source. You always have been. You just didn't know how to read your own language. But here's the twist. Recognizing that synchronicities are psychic projections doesn't make them any less real. In fact, it makes them more real, because now they are no longer random events to which you assign arbitrary meaning. They become clues, indicators of what is happening in deeper layers of your experience, things you feel but can't name, conflicts you carry but can't resolve. And when you learn to read these clues, when you stop asking, what is the universe trying to tell me, and start asking, what am I trying to tell myself, everything changes. Because the answer isn't out there. It never was. It's here, inside, waiting to be heard. And maybe true synchronicity is just that. The moment you finally realize that the voice you were looking for in the universe was yours all along. But what if all of this is true? What if synchronicities are really just psychic projections? What if there is no cosmic intelligence organizing events? What if the universe is exactly what science says it is, mechanical, indifferent, blind? What's left? That's the question no one wants to ask. Because the answer is uncomfortable. What's left is you, alone, in a universe that doesn't care, that doesn't respond, that doesn't validate, that offers no meaning beyond what you invent. And for many people, that is unbearable. Camus knew this. He spent his entire life exploring what he called the absurd, the irreconcilable tension between the human need for meaning and the indifference of the universe. You seek purpose. The world offers none. You want your actions to matter. The universe is not paying attention. And yet you continue to exist. You continue to act. You keep trying. And it is precisely in this tension that the human condition resides. Camus said that recognizing the absurd does not mean giving up. It means living with the awareness that meaning is not given, that nothing is guaranteed, that you are in fact sailing without a compass. And yet you choose to create. You choose to act. You choose to exist. But this requires something brutal, living without illusions. And synchronicities, when interpreted as cosmic messages, are exactly that, illusions. Ways to protect yourself from the truth that you are radically alone. But the issue is not so simple, because there is a difference between living with illusions and living with symbols. Illusion is believing that the universe is literally talking to you, that external events are caused by supernatural forces, that there is a hidden plan at work. A symbol is recognizing that your mind creates bridges of meaning, and that these bridges, even though they are internal constructs, have real value, because they help you process, to understand, to integrate experiences that would otherwise remain fragmented. And perhaps maturity is not about abandoning symbols, it's about knowing the difference. Because here's the problem with the purely scientific approach. It explains the mechanism, but it offers no consolation. You lose someone. Science tells you that your brain is projecting, that confirmation bias is amplifying coincidences, that it's all misinterpreted statistics. And technically it's right, but so what? It doesn't help you sleep. It doesn't lessen the pain. It offers no way to process the loss. It just leaves you with the information that you are inventing meaning where there is none, and that you should stop. And then what? You accept that the person is gone, that there is no connection, that the universe continues to spin indifferently, and that your pain is just a biochemical process that will diminish over time. Technically correct. Emotionally devastating, because what science doesn't solve is the question, how to live knowing this, how to wake up every day in a world that doesn't care, how to invest energy in things that have no intrinsic meaning, how to love knowing that everything ends, how to create knowing that nothing remains. And that's where synchronicities offer something that science doesn't, a way to inhabit the absurd without being crushed by it. Not because they are true in a literal sense, but because they create an experience of connection, even if temporary, even if illusory, even if fragile. And maybe that's enough, because the alternative, living in total lucidity, without any form of enchantment, without any symbolic bridge between you and the world, is not only difficult, it's almost impossible. And here's the irony. The people who preach rational materialism the most, who insist that everything is just chemistry and physics, rarely live according to it. They still celebrate birthdays as if the number of times the earth revolves around the sun matters. They still value promises as if words had real weight. They still feel that some things are right and others wrong, even though they know that morality is a social construct. Because living without any layer of invented meaning is not wisdom, it's madness. So maybe the real question isn't, are synchronicities real? Maybe it's, what do you lose by insisting they aren't? And the answer may be, you lose the last form of relationship with the world that still seems alive. You lose the possibility of experience that goes beyond the functional. You lose the ability to be surprised, to feel that there is more going on than just matter in motion. And yes, you gain something in return. You gain lucidity. You gain intellectual consistency. You gain the satisfaction of not deceiving yourself. But you pay a price. The price is the radical loneliness of someone who knows they are talking to themselves. And maybe not everyone is willing to pay that price. Maybe not everyone needs to. So before dismissing synchronicities as a pathetic illusion, it's worth asking, what purpose are they serving? What legitimate human need are they fulfilling? And what happens when you take that away from someone without offering anything in its place? What happens is despair, emptiness, loss of enchantment, and eventually, collapse. Because the human mind was not made to inhabit pure emptiness. It needs narrative, causality, meaning, even if invented. And synchronicities, when properly understood, offer this without demanding blind belief. They can be recognized as psychic projections and still honored as valid experiences. You can know that you are creating meaning and still choose to create. You can recognize that the universe is not speaking and still hear what your mind is trying to tell you through it. You can live with the awareness of absurdity and still choose symbols. And maybe that's not a contradiction. Perhaps it is precisely the balance that Camus was looking for. To live without illusions, but also without cynicism, to recognize the indifference of the world, and yet choose to create beauty, create meaning, create connection. Not because it is true in an absolute sense, but because it is human, and because you deserve to live as a human, not as a logical processing machine in a desert of meaning. If you feel that this kind of reflection resonates, that there is value in exploring the fine line between rationality and emotional need, you can find more videos like this on the channel, because these questions have no easy answers. But they deserve to be asked, and they deserve to be lived honestly without rushing to resolve what may not need to be resolved. So what remains? If the universe does not speak, if synchronicities are projections, if meaning is not given, what do you do with that? Nietzsche had an answer, and it may be the most honest one anyone has ever offered. You create, not because there is meaning waiting to be discovered, but because creating meaning is what makes you human. It is the only thing that distinguishes you from a rock rolling down a mountain, blindly obeying gravity. Nietzsche said that God is dead, and with him all absolute certainties, all eternal truths, all guaranteed purposes. What remained was emptiness. But Nietzsche did not see this as a tragedy. He saw it as liberation, because now you are no longer bound to a meaning imposed from above. You no longer have to obey a purpose that someone else has decided for you. You can create your own. And synchronicities enter this equation in a surprising way, because recognizing that you are projecting meaning does not mean that the meaning is false. It means that the meaning is yours. You are the author. And that gives you something that no belief in external forces could give you: creative responsibility. When you believe that the universe is sending you signs, you become passive, waiting, interpreting, trying to decipher what they want from you. Who are they? It doesn't matter. God, the universe, fate, some higher power. And you get stuck in a guessing game. Did I interpret it correctly? Am I on the right path? Is this a sign to continue or to stop? And deep down, you know you'll never be sure, because there is no objective answer. You're reading tea leaves, and each reading depends on the mood, fear, and hope you bring to the interpretation. But when you recognize that you are creating meaning, that synchronicities are your mind using the world as a canvas to paint symbols, everything changes. Because now you're no longer trying to guess, you're creating. And that requires something radically different: artistic awareness. Think of a painter. He doesn't discover the finished painting somewhere hidden in reality. He creates it. He chooses colors. He decides on the composition. He imposes form on chaos. And the painting is real, it exists, it has impact, but it didn't exist before he decided to create it. Your life works the same way. You are not discovering meaning, you are creating it. And synchronicities are just one of the ways you do that. You highlight certain events, you connect certain dots, you construct a certain narrative, and that narrative becomes the story you tell about your life. But here's the crucial part. Recognizing that it is a construction does not make it any less real, because the construction has real effects. The narrative you choose to live shapes your actions, your choices, your emotions, and therefore shapes your life. So the question is not, is this narrative objectively true? The question is, does this narrative help me live better? And that changes everything, because now you are no longer bound by truth or falsehood. You are in the realm of art, and art is not measured by truth. It is measured by impact. You can recognize that that song playing at the right moment was not cosmic orchestration. It was statistical coincidence amplified by your emotional state, and still choose to honor that moment. Give it symbolic weight. Let it mean something in your story, not because it is universal truth, but because it is true for you, and you have a right to that. You have the right to inhabit a symbolic world, to create bridges of meaning, to transform chance into narrative, as long as you know you're doing it, as long as you don't fool yourself into thinking that the world is validating your choices, because the world doesn't validate. It never has. It never will. But you can validate. You can choose what matters. You can decide what it means. You can be the artist of your own experience. And synchronicities cease to be a mystery to be unraveled and become creative raw material. You take coincidences. You take random events, and you choose how to integrate them into your story. You decide whether it was an obstacle or a redirection, whether it was loss or liberation, whether it was the end or the beginning. There is no correct answer. There is only the answer you choose to live. And that is not irresponsible relativism. It is radical freedom, because you are no longer waiting for the universe to tell you what to do. You are taking ownership, and that is terrifying. But it is also the only way to live without feeling held hostage by invisible forces. Nietzsche called this amor fati, love of fate, not because destiny is beautiful, but because you choose to embrace it. You choose to say yes to life as it is, absurd, random, without guarantees, and still create beauty. And synchronicities can be part of that creation. As long as you don't fool yourself about what you're doing, you're not receiving messages, you're creating meaning. And that's much more powerful, because it means you don't have to wait for permission. You don't need external validation. You don't need the universe to confirm your choices. You can simply choose and live accordingly. And perhaps that is true existential maturity, recognizing that meaning is invented, and inventing it anyway, consciously, deliberately, artistically, not because you believe in the illusion, but because you choose creation. And between living in a sterile void of materialistic certainties or inhabiting a symbolic world that you yourself construct, perhaps the second option is the only one that allows you to live as a human being. Because in the end, you are not a logical processing machine. You are a creator of meaning, and you always have been. You just needed permission to admit it, and now you have it. But there is a cost, and no one talks about it. The cost of knowing that you are creating meaning is that you can never again believe completely. You can never again surrender naively. You can never again feel that absolute certainty that people who have not yet awakened seem to have. And that creates a very specific loneliness. It is not the loneliness of being physically alone. It is the loneliness of being conscious in a world where most people still operate on illusions that you have already gone through. It is the loneliness of no longer being able to share the enchantment without feeling the weight of lucidity behind it. You see someone excitedly telling you about a synchronicity, their eyes shining, their voice full of conviction. The universe sent me a sign. I knew I was on the right path. And you know it wasn't the universe. You know it was her mind projecting. You know she's clinging to a coincidence to make the uncertainty of a difficult choice bearable. And you have two options. You can tell the truth, explain the mechanism, show that there is nothing out there confirming anything, that she is alone, that she always has been, and destroy the only comfort she has at that moment. Or you can let it be. Validate her experience. Recognize that even if it is a projection, it is fulfilling a real psychological function, and carry the weight of knowing alone. And that weight is real, because you can't go back. You can no longer believe the way she believes. You can no longer feel that pure relief of thinking that something greater is taking care of things, that there is a plan, that everything will make sense in the end. You know it won't. And that's not cynicism, it's lucidity. But lucidity comes at a price. The price is never again being able to rest completely in the illusion. Never again being able to outsource responsibility to invisible forces. Never again being able to wait for the universe to solve things for you. And in a way, that's freedom. But it's also exile. Because most people don't want freedom. They want belonging. They want validation. They want to believe they're not alone. And when you stop believing that, you automatically put yourself outside the circle. Not out of arrogance, not out of superiority, but because you can no longer pretend. And people sense that. They sense that you're not buying the narrative, that you're one step behind, watching while they live. And that creates distance. So you learn to measure, to validate without lying, to honor the experience without reinforcing the illusion, to let everyone live their own journey without trying to speed up anyone's awakening process, because you know what it costs, and you know that not everyone is ready to pay. But here's the weirdest part. Even though you know synchronicities are projections, you still feel them. You still get goosebumps when an impossible coincidence happens. You still stop. You still wonder. And for a second, you almost believe it. You almost give in. You almost let the feeling of connection to something greater envelop you completely. And then consciousness returns. And you remember. And the enchantment is broken. And you are left in the middle, between meaning and emptiness. Between the child who believes and the adult who knows. Between the human need to belong and the lucidity that exiles. And there is no resolution for this. There is no magical third option where you can feel everything without knowing anything. Where you have the enchantment without the illusion. Where you belong without giving up consciousness. You are stuck between two worlds, and neither of them wants you completely. Kierkegaard knew this. He called it despair. Not emotional despair, but the structural despair of being a conscious being trapped in a dying body, in a world that offers no guarantees, in an existence that demands choices without maps. And synchronicities are just a symptom of this greater despair. Because deep down, what you want when you seek synchronicities is not confirmation that the universe is speaking. It is confirmation that you are not alone, that there is something beyond the void, that your existence matters to something greater than yourself. And when you recognize that synchronicities are projections, you are recognizing that there is no confirmation coming from outside, that you are in fact alone, that you always have been. And that is terrifying. But it is also the beginning of something else. Something that most people never achieve because they cannot bear to cross that territory. The beginning of existential self-sufficiency. Not in the arrogant sense of I don't need anyone, but in the profound sense of I don't need the universe to validate my existence for it to have value. Because when you stop waiting for external validation, whether from the universe, God, or other people, you can finally begin to build internal value. Value that doesn't depend on signs, that doesn't depend on confirmations, that doesn't depend on feeling that you are on the right path because something greater has approved it. You simply choose the path and live with the consequences. No guarantees, no confirmations, no comforting synchronicities telling you that everything is fine. And that is adult, radically adult. But few are willing to get there because it's lonely, because it's hard, because it requires you to sustain your own existence without invisible support. And the truth is that most people prefer the illusion. They prefer to believe that there is something out there taking care of them, guiding them, protecting them, even though deep down they know there isn't. And there's nothing wrong with that. Everyone chooses the level of lucidity they can handle. And forcing someone beyond that limit is not wisdom, it's cruelty. But if you've come this far, if you've read this far and something in you recognizes this tension, this feeling of being stuck between worlds, between believing and knowing, between belonging and exile, then you already know. You've already crossed over, and there's no turning back. And perhaps the only thing left is to learn to live with it, with the tension, with the contradiction, with the fact that you can know that meaning is invented and still need to invent it, that you can recognize the radical loneliness of existence and still choose connection, that you can see through illusions and still honor the human experience of creating symbols. Because in the end, it's not about choosing between lucidity and enchantment. It's about learning to live with both, knowing that they will never completely reconcile, that there will always be tension, that there will always be that feeling of being a little out of place. And maybe that's not a flaw. Maybe it's exactly where you should be, on the threshold, between meaning and emptiness, too conscious to believe, too human to stop creating. And maybe the question was never, are synchronicities real? Maybe it was always how to live knowing they aren't, but needing them to be. And the answer isn't comfortable, but it's honest. You live with the tension, you recognize the contradiction, and you choose to create meaning anyway. Not because it's true, but because it's what keeps you human. And in the end, that's all you have. So what to do with all this? With the weight of knowing, with the freedom to create, with the loneliness of being conscious in a world that still sleeps? The answer is not simple, but it is possible. You learn to live with the tension, without trying to resolve it, because the temptation is always the same, to seek a final synthesis, a definitive position. Either you believe completely in synchronicities and live as if the universe were speaking, or you dismiss everything as illusion and live in sterile materialism. But both are lies. Both are ways of escaping the most uncomfortable truth, that you are stuck in the middle, that there is no clean resolution, that the human condition is precisely this tension between the need for meaning and the absence of guarantees. And living well does not mean resolving this tension. It means inhabiting it. It means recognizing that you can know that synchronicities are psychic projections and still honor the experience when they happen. Not because they are literally real, but because they are symbolically true for you at that moment. And that's not hypocrisy. It's emotional sophistication, because you're doing something that few can do, maintaining two levels of consciousness at the same time. The level that knows and the level that feels. And you're not letting one destroy the other. You can see the song playing on the radio and recognize that it's a statistical coincidence. And at the same time allow that moment to carry symbolic weight. Let it mean something in your internal narrative. Let it serve as an emotional marker of an important transition. Not because the universe put that song there, but because you chose to give it that role. And that is power. Real creative power. Because you are no longer hostage to external forces. You are no longer waiting for signs to make decisions. You are using the world as a canvas, as symbolic raw material, as a language to talk to yourself. And that changes everything. It changes the way you deal with coincidences. It changes the way you interpret events. It changes the way you construct your own story. Because now you know you are the author, not the discoverer, not the passive interpreter, the active author. And authors have freedom, but they also have responsibility. The responsibility to choose well, to create narratives that empower you, not imprison you, to use symbols that help you grow, not keep you dependent on external validation. And that requires discernment. It requires maturity. It requires you to constantly evaluate, is this narrative serving me, or am I deceiving myself? Because the line is thin, between consciously creating meaning and losing yourself in comforting illusions, between using symbols as tools and becoming hostage to them. And you will make mistakes. Sometimes you will find yourself believing too much. Sometimes you will find yourself being too cynical. And that's okay, because it's not about always being right. It's about keeping your conscience active, about not falling completely asleep on either side. And there are days when it's harder, days when you miss innocence, days when you envy those who still believe without question, days when lucidity seems too heavy a burden. And on those days you can rest in creation. You can choose a symbol. You can let a coincidence mean something. You can allow yourself to feel that you are not alone, even knowing that it is you talking to yourself through the world, because that is not weakness. It is humanity, and you are entitled to it. Even knowing, even conscious, even lucid, you have the right to create bridges of meaning, to inhabit a symbolic world, to feel that there is more going on than just matter in motion, as long as you know it's a choice, not an imposition of the universe, your choice. And perhaps this is the closest to freedom that a conscious being can achieve, knowing that meaning is not given, and choosing to create anyway, not because you believe in the illusion, but because you choose the beauty of creation over the emptiness of absolute certainty. And synchronicities can be part of that. They can continue to happen. They can continue to generate that thrill, that feeling that something greater is at work, and you can let it be. You can honor it, you can use it without having to lie to yourself about what you are doing. Because in the end, the question was never whether synchronicities are real in the literal sense. The question has always been, what does it reveal about you that you need them? And the answer is simple. It reveals that you are human, that you seek meaning, that you resist emptiness, that you build bridges where there are none. And that is not a pathology. It is the mark of consciousness, the signature of the species that looked at the indifferent universe and said, it doesn't matter, I'm going to create meaning anyway. And you will. You already are. You always have been. Only now you know, and knowing changes everything, because now you are no longer at the mercy of others. You are no longer waiting for permission. You are no longer seeking validation that will never come. You are the source. You always have been. And perhaps the real synchronicity was this, the moment you realized that the voice you were looking for in the universe was yours all along, and now you can finally hear it. So the question for you is this: what was the last synchronicity you experienced, and what do you think your mind was trying to tell you? Because maybe it's not about the universe. Maybe it's about you, about what you're avoiding seeing, about what you need to process, about the internal conflict that's screaming to be heard. And when you start asking that question, when you shift from what does the universe want from me to what am I trying to tell myself, everything starts to make sense. Not the meaning that was out there waiting to be discovered, but the meaning that was always here inside, waiting to be created. Watch the next videos on the channel. Count on me and follow the white rabbit.